Jochen Engert ist hier und herzlich willkommen. I just said to Jochen, I'm not going to tell a lot about yourself because you're much better in telling about yourself and whatever you want to learn. Again, our Startup Talks format, this is our third lecture within our Startup Talks format, is there for interaction. It's an interaction format. It's not an in-front lecture. It's there for you to ask your question, pose your questions, ask questions. It's in a way it can be a dialogue. Of course, you will have to hit it off in the beginning, and hitting off is I believe it's extremely interesting to have you here. And I see from the numbers here we have a big audience today. Everyone else is also interested. I thought about you last weekend without knowing you, because we have a running gag. My wife and I, whenever we're on the Autobahn, so this started a couple of years back, my wife pointed out a green bus to me. She said, "Oh, look, there's a green bus." And I said, "Yeah." And I sort of knew that there was a change going on, so I waited to the next trip, and this was when we saw a couple of green buses, and I pointed out each and every one of these buses, and I said, "Look, a green bus." And she said, "Okay, I got the message." Nowadays, when we go on the road, I only point out once to one green bus, and she gets the message, because nowadays there's nothing but green buses on the road. So it's, in a way, it's amusing. And this is when I was thinking about you on Friday when we were on the road. Why might this be interesting for so many people? I don't know. For me, particularly, it's interesting because whenever you talk about startups, you think about something techie startup. And I'm not saying this is nothing about technology, but I'm talking about that technology startups normally are, well, this is my picture, is something you can't really touch. It has an interface and you can interact, but you can't really touch. And buses you can truly touch. They're really, really massive and you can touch it. And I think that might be one of the things that is interesting for you, how to build a startup out of something that is already existing and very touchable. So that might be good, and also to learn how you got so far, what brought you there, what are you going to do tomorrow? That's the next thing, which the last sessions were all about scalability and size, and I mean there's no market anymore in Germany. Where are you going to take this? What are you going to do? What are you thinking about when you talk about those things I heard about railroads and railroad companies and these things? So maybe that I don't know if you're going into that, but that might be interesting, and maybe for our students also. But don't scare them off. I heard you saying someday that Flixbus is more interesting than having a PhD title or doing a PhD. And that might be also something you can refer to. So, Jochen, thank you for being here. Pleasure, interesting. Hit it off.
Thanks very much. So I'll just switch this over to green slides. Hello, everybody. I'm Jochen from Flixbus. I'm very happy to be here. As I said to your colleagues before, I've never been here, so it's pretty cool to see how university looks in modern days and in an IT and engineering environment. My university looked a little different. So I'm not an engineer from background. I studied business administration with a technical orientation, so I did have also engineering classes, but that was only like a minor share in my university. We started Flixbus out of a team of 3 when we were at the very beginning. And I'll try to explain you why we are much more a technology company than is visible from the outside. And when we started off, we actually figured for ourselves we wanted to do something that's not only digital, but something that does have also a real piece to it, something that's tangible that you can touch and see. We didn't know back then that it was going to be buses, so that was something that we sort of came across along the way. But today we're quite happy that we did it, and you referred to the PhD. When we started the business, 2 of 3 founders, so myself and Andre, we were doing PhD research back then, but at some point had to decide whether we're going to do that research career and finish the PhD or whether we're going to stick with Flixbus and take that opportunity. Back then, everybody thought we were pretty crazy not to go for the PhD. Today, we're pretty happy we did take that decision. And I'll try to make this really, it's called Startup Talks, so let's make this a talk and not a lecture. So happy to answer any of your questions along the way, feel free to interrupt at any point. And I'll try to give you a little background on who we are and what we do and where we're going, and put all this under scaling operations. So talk a little bit about how did we build the organization, how did we build the processes that we use. Also, since this is obviously an engineering heavy evening tonight, talk a little bit about how does our IT team work, how do we do development, what is the backbone of our business model, and how does that work. Just maybe as a brief introduction, if you look at the market that we're in, we call ourselves a mobility company, so we're competing with trains, planes, your private cars, carpooling in a lot of ways, and different forms of mobility. And most of these businesses and markets face a few challenges that we see, and one is pretty CapEx intensive, so it means you need a lot of money and a lot of investment to initially start off with your offering. So I put trains on the slide because it's even more expensive than a bus, but if you would want to buy a bus, you'd have to invest somewhere between 300,000 euros to 450, in some cases even 500,000 euros. So there's a lot of money to put in there. And that ultimately leads to a pretty complex supply and demand matching problem. So you want to make sure you get sufficient utilization on these assets to make best use of your money. And this is typically a pretty complex problem where demand hits supply. You need to optimize this continuously. That's also something that we try to tackle with technology. And one thing that I feel has, is a relatively recent trend is that people have more and more transparency about the price of mobility. So who of you owns a car or uses his own car? So relatively few. Well, I would have expected you. Most people underestimate how much it actually costs to run a car. And if you have a small car, it's somewhere between probably 30 to 40 cents per kilometer, accounting for all costs and not only fuel, which most people do. They just look at their fuel bill and that's pretty much the cost of running the car. It's not really true. What sort of brings us to the situation today is stuff like you have Car2Go, you have Uber, you have different means of transportation where you basically use mobility as a service. And you get a direct feedback on how much does it cost to use it per minute, per kilometer. So you get a lot better understanding. And we feel this is going to help us because we have a pretty strong cost advantage. So we'll always be able to offer you a very good value for money proposition if you look for a transportation option. And when we started, and you also mentioned that, we had a pretty simple idea. We're running buses between cities. It's not super innovative. It's been done before. It's been existing for decades. People have used it for a very long time, and millions of people have used it. We're a small founder team, so 3 guys with no background in the industry at all. We had no clue literally about logistics, travel, buses, mobility, transportation, the market itself. We all had to sort of learn it for ourselves along the way. And we've had a few nice PowerPoint slides. And I had a background in consulting, so I knew how to do PowerPoints. Hope you can see this still today. That was it, what we had when we started. And as I said before, everybody thought we're pretty crazy to do this. They were like, there's going to be huge companies coming to the market. You're going to have Deutsche Bahn there. You're going to have large corporates, state-owned companies. How could you compete as a startup? And even our friends and families, everybody called us fools. We still wanted to do it and wanted to go. And the reason for us back then was our business now was initially based on the deregulation in Germany. So back in 2013, so January 1st, the market was deregulated. They've talked about it for years. So it was written down in what we don't have today, a coalition contract. So 2009, the former black and yellow government wrote in their coalition contract, so their political agenda, we're going to deregulate the market. And we've seen this back then, and we felt this can be a cool opportunity to build a new business. And it took 4 years ultimately until the market really got deregulated. And we've seen it early on, and we've sort of looked at it along the way. And ultimately we figured we've seen the opportunity, we believe in the market, we see there's demand out there, and we feel we could do it. And if we don't do it, we're going to hate ourselves for the rest of our lives because it's going to be successful somehow and someone's going to do it. So ultimately we figured we need to jump and just try it out. And this was how we got started. And this was our first office, so a lot smaller than this here. So any room that you have is probably a lot bigger than our first office. So we were 3 founders, we had 2 interns, and we were trying to, and this was how we started, super digital. Like this is network planning data here on the wall, on paper. We've had a first big investment, which was our printer. So we've argued about 2 weeks whether we should invest 400 euros in a printer, and finally made it a business case that it's easier and cheaper to print it on our own printer compared to copy shops when we visited bus companies to pitch them our concept. And this was how we started. We had to move out, obviously, at some point because the team was growing pretty quickly. And we've been told as long as you have more square meters than people, everything's fine. When we sort of came across that point, we had to find a new office. This was how we started. And then if you look at what we do today, well, many of you will know our buses, or most of you will know our buses. Who traveled with us already? That's good. There's more people than car owners. That's very good. We've sort of gave the product bus traveling a different image than it had in the past. Like when we first looked at the market, the bus had a pretty old-fashioned image. So it was more like seniors would use it to do weekend trips, and people would try to sell you weird stuff like heating blankets and these things. So it was a pretty old-fashioned product. So what we did is we obviously upgraded the product. We had a one brand approach. We made sure that you get some amenities on board, is free Wi-Fi, toilets, etc., electricity outlets, etc. And with that, really gave the product, which was old, has been there forever, but had that fresh and new and more innovative look. So we really changed the perception that people had from bus travel, and now, meanwhile, have made this pretty big across Europe. And this is where we're going. So we feel, as I said, we want to deliver something that's smart and green mobility, and we want to help people really to experience the world. Because if you look at what we do, most people the vast majority of people who travel with us are not traveling with us because they want to sit on a bus. There's a few that love it, but most people want to get somewhere, want to see friends, want to see family, want to visit new cities. So it's really about making experiences and exploring the world. And this is also what is so motivating for our team, that you really have an impact on people's lives. So this is basically our vision and where we're going. We do this in 26 countries right now. It's all across Europe, basically. There's only a few white spots on the map. And we're going to do this also in the future in even more countries. We're in the middle of expanding the business to the US. So there's a launch team sitting in Los Angeles preparing our market entry there. And we're pretty sure there's going to be more opportunities also in other countries and continents. And I'm going to talk about this later a lot more, but we're over 1,100 people meanwhile. So we started being 3 about 6 years ago, and now it's over 1,100. So it's been, along the way, has become pretty much a big organization. And this is not counting our drivers. So there's another 6,000-7,000 drivers on top of that. And we've sort of built this along the way and over the last 5 years, and we're going to have the 5th anniversary actually next month. There's over 100 million passengers who traveled with us. So if someone would have told me that 5 years ago, I probably would have called him also pretty crazy. So as I said, today we're connecting pretty much any major city across Europe. How do we do that? And this is probably the first learning that we took along the way. You need to develop a business model that adds value in a market, and a product that adds value. I need to build this, and this is our true belief, on a strong technology platform. So what we did is, we said we could buy buses, we could employ drivers, but this is not where we add value. There's people out there who've been doing this for decades, and they probably know better than us. Where we would add value is when we're building the platform. We want to build the brand, we want to build the technology around it, and make sure that we orchestrate everything around it. So this is how we started, and this is the business model that we came up with. So what we do today is we start at the very early point in terms of we decide which cities we want to connect, how often per day, at what time of the day, and do all the network planning around it and do all the licensing. So in most countries there's an authorization process involved, so you need to talk to some authorities to get your license to run the services, and then over time optimize our network and planning. So this is also the supply and demand match that we do here. We do all the branding and the marketing around it, so all the marketing that you might see, any TV commercial, any online ads, any flyers, anything that's done from our team. and we do all the stuff that's involved with the sale and service of the tickets and the operations. Also, our call center in larger cases is internal. We do all the ticketing ourselves, and this is where our technology platform comes into play, and I'll give you some more overview and background later. We figured we need to do this ourselves as well, because this is super critical for us as a company to be able to optimize this over time, to develop the features that we want to have, to build the architecture that we need, and to do this at a speed that works in our environment, in our business. And initially, when we started, we sort of picked some stuff from the market, tried to sort of build a system that sells tickets initially, but very quickly figured that you need to do most of the stuff in-house to be able to be fast, adaptive, and to really be customer-oriented and really develop the features that that help your customers. And the operational piece, so the operations of the buses, is done by typical small and mid-sized bus companies. So we figured there's tons of companies out there. In Germany alone, it's 4,500 bus companies who do all sorts of business. They do charter trips. So if you're a group of people, you can just go there and book a bus or rent a bus. They do public transportation. They do travel, in some cases their own, and some other stuff as well. And so they have all the experience. They have driver pools, they have depots, they have buses already. And we figured we need to partner with them in order to be able to scale this quickly. So what we did is we went out, pitched them, had the PowerPoints with us, pitched them, this is what we're going to do. It's going to be a great market. We're going to be partners. We're going to share revenues with you. And we're going to take all the risk on the marketing and sales side, and you're going to invest into buses and drivers, etc. And we're going to do this together, and together be much stronger than anybody else who's out there. Pretty bold concept back then. We found, after talking to, I think, over 100 bus companies initially, we found like 4 or 5 crazy folks who said, I'm going to trust these guys, I'm going to try it out with you. And those were the ones who started the business with us. So they said, I'm going to buy these buses, brand them, employ the drivers, and then start this with you, and then we're going to see what's happening. And this is how we got the whole thing started. And today, it's over 250 partners across Europe. We've signed the first ones in the US, so the concept seems to work there as well. And they overall invested over 500 million euros into that fleet. So most of them bought the buses brand new, so invested into add-on capacity to run this with us. And with that, took that big CapEx investment into establishing that fleet out there. And I talked about our technology platform, and that is the sort of business and PowerPoint overview, and it has nothing to do with the real world. So I'll just try to make this a little more abstract to be able myself to explain it. If you have more detailed questions, I'll have to refer to Daniel, to our IT founder. But basically what we did is we built an integrated system that manages and controls all our business, and we've built all of this internally. So we said, we need to control, obviously, capacity, our schedules, our prices, reservations, the ticketing, the service system that belongs to it. We've built all the apps ourselves. So there's obviously an iOS and Android version. Our drivers have a specific app that they use for check-in, for ticket sales, also for the management of their routes. We were in the middle of building a yield management and optimization tool that's basically built on the data that we're collecting and continuously optimizing over time. We're building a bid management tool that helps us to, on the one hand, manage and automate our Google AdWords and different other marketing channels. We built our own BI internally to be able to have all the data available and be able to use this. And we're building all the sort of satellite systems around it as well. The only thing that we didn't build is our ERP, because you usually would want to use something that's, we don't use the one that financed this year. But this is something that you would typically use from the market. But most of the stuff that's critical for our business and that helps us to differentiate and that helps us to optimize the business, we built internally. So today, the engineering and product management team is over 200 people and keeps growing. So we continuously invest into that. And that's why I said initially, we're much more a technology company that you would see from the outside. Because we figured for us, anything that you could buy from the market. So you could buy probably an airline system that does ticketing for you. But what these systems can't do, they don't really have that multi-stop logic. So it's A to B connections. Maybe there's an interchange and then it's A to B to C. But we typically have stuff like you want to go from A to F and change on the way. So the order of magnitude of the possible scenarios is much bigger than that, and ultimately it's not tailored to our needs. Same is true for the bid management tool. Same is true for any app that we might use, for any other feature that we build in. So we figured we need to build this ourselves to be able to really scale this quickly and get the features that we wanted. And how we got there, and sort of how we sort of try to manage this is, it started with sort of the strategy that we had. I sort of showed you the business model, and we figured over time we need to make this strategy more tangible for the team. And so we broke this down into 4 overarching goals that we use internally to make sure that we're all going into the same direction. And we basically broke it down into a growth target, so where we want to be in terms of passenger numbers, revenues, tickets, etc. We broke it down into a profitability goal because we figured we need to make money with that for us, for our partners, and for us to be able to invest into the business further and grow it further. And we said we have a goal towards customer happiness. So we measure customer satisfaction regularly. So if you travel with us, you will all have received an email from us asking you for feedback. So we use this to measure which lines perform, which drivers perform, which of our bus partners deliver great quality, and where do we have to improve. And ultimately, we use this also to measure our own success. And we have something that we call excellence. So you might think of this like a little bit like what Google has been doing in terms of you take a certain share of your time and we want you to invest this into projects that help us as a company, as a team to develop forward. So this is kind of like our investment into internal processes, cool tools, innovative features, etc. So there's another specific goal for that as well. And this is basically the overview. So that's kind of like where we're going. So we really want to be and become a global player in the future. We want to manage this on an organic and profitable growth path, continuously improve our customer happiness. And this is something that's not very common, to really put hard customer satisfaction targets also in your goal achievement plans for the management team. And we keep investing into excellence to make sure we're going to stay productive, we're going to take the right decisions, we're efficient in what we do. And maybe this is an overview in terms of how would you build a larger organization, and what is the learning out of that. And I try to sort of get this down to four points or 4 steps. And kind of like this is what we've seen and learned along the way. And first thing you would do is build an org structure. And when you start and you're a small team and a small startup, you don't really need this because everybody knows what everybody's doing, and you can just like shout across the desk and everybody's updated on all the progress all the time. And there comes a point when you're like 15, 20 people. This is where you at least should have it. We probably started doing it way too late. So we started doing it when we were 25, 30. And it's been pretty chaotic along the way. So we said, look, we're going to need an org chart and we're going to write down who's responsible for what. And the team hated it. And they said, no, I don't want to do only this. I want to do all of that and like a little bit here and a little bit there. So the team hated it. But ultimately, if you scale an organization, there's no way around it. And you need to do this at some point. So that was the first thing we did. So we built an org chart, and we basically, still keep throwing it away every 3, 4, 5 months because the organization changed, market changed, business changed, so you need to adapt it over time. And we still keep doing this. Second thing that was critical for us was we need to establish a certain level of processes for the key stuff that we're doing. And for us, initially, it was what we called the go-live process. So whenever we had new lines coming up that we wanted to start, we had a process to manage that. And initially, it was like really manual work. So there was boxes standing around in the office, and people put the equipment that we would send out to our bus partners in there. There was Wi-Fi equipment. There was like training books and all of the stuff. It was all over the place in the office. And we figured, look, we need a process for this. This is chaos. And we started with an Excel spreadsheet. And there was the process was mapped in an Excel spreadsheet. And obviously, you all know that this is not really scalable. So over time, you keep developing that, put it into different software tools, and optimize it over time. But this again was something that people hated because they had to sit in meetings, had to tick boxes, did you do this and that? But ultimately we needed this to be able to scale and do this efficiently. And today what we do is more like points 3 and 4. We have spent and are still doing a lot of effort and investment into making sure that people have the information that they need for their job. And it starts at very simple points like who's responsible for what. Like if I have a problem on the online marketing side, who do I call? Who do I ask? So we try to implement systems, again, processes and procedures to help people understand all of that. At the moment, for example, we work on our onboarding process to make sure that new people who come onto the team are aware of where can I get which type of information, which systems can I use, how do I use our BI, how do I use our intranet, etc. And so this is something that for us as a bigger organization is very critical. And the fourth point, and that's typically our sort of IT team that's responsible for that, is to make sure that you automate as much as you can. Maybe that's an interesting question that you might take a guess on. If you think about our Google account, our AdWords account, what's your estimate on how many keywords we're using? Take a guess. Someone try. Come on, what do you think? 100? Another guess?
2,000. Okay.
Someone more?
10,000.
It's 75 million. So that's something you can't manage manually. That's something where Excel comes to its limits. So you need to build a tool for this. And over time, initially we did it manually. Then we walked to Excel, that we had some macros in Excel. And then now we're building a software to be able to manage this, because this is the granularity that you need to do this efficiently. And so initially you need to learn how the stuff works, and then you need to optimize it along the way, and then you come to the automation point. So this is where we spend most of our time now. Make sure that info and data is available to the team, and then make sure we focus our engineering and IT efforts on how do we automate the stuff that's sort of helping us the most. And this is just a very abstract view on how does our organization work. Obviously, it's much more complex than that. But in general, how we work is the business piece works on a matrix pretty much. So we have responsibilities for the different regions, which is DACH, so the German-speaking countries, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And we have central functions that are closely related to the business, which is marketing and sales, network planning and pricing, and operations. And there's a few headquarter functions or like true central functions, which is HR and finance and our IT team, which then again is broken down into software engineering, the data team, our product management, and our infrastructure team. And this is kind of like how we use over 1,000 people. And what we figured out does work for us along the way. This has looked differently 6 months ago, and it will probably look a little different again 6 months from now. So we're continuously iterating around that over time. And to make it a little more complex, this is how our IT organization works. I'm not sure how many of you have sort of worked in larger IT teams, and we certainly had our different versions of how do we think this works. Ultimately, we asked ourselves, what do we want to do with our engineering team, and what do we want to do with our platform, and how do we want to develop this forward into the future? And we said it has to deliver a few things. It has to be very close to the business. We want to make sure that we have a good prioritization in terms of what do we do in the team, because it's always a scarce resource. So engineering is always a bottleneck to be fast on and make progress. And we wanted to make sure that also the team has the freedom to deliver innovation here and has an organization that works for us in terms of the architecture that's the outcome is something that's scalable in the future. So we said we're going to need a few things. There's going to be product owners, so people who build that connection from the engineering team to the business team. And there's chapter leads, basically experts in specific fields that help also have a thought and content leadership on specific areas. And And we try to build the teams around what we call domains. So there's guys that work basically on our backend system. There's folks who work on our apps, and there's folks who work on the data piece for it. And with that, build an organization that looks pretty complex from the outside, but we made sure that everybody has his very specific role and is very clear around what is my job here and what is my task and where am I going and how can I contribute to the overall development and overall engineering. And this is what we came up with. It's still a process, so we've started this about a year ago. So it's really a continuous process to make sure you fill all the roles, people understand their role there. You're going to come to an efficient sort of working style here, and really make best use of our engineering capacities, because as I said, it's very scarce. So there's always very hard fights around which features are we going to do next, and what are we going to develop, and who's going to decide on what's getting priority. And this is basically how we figured, again, this is coming back to the process. So the process that we came up with in terms of what do we develop or how do we prioritize our development roadmap. And we said the impulse always has to come out of the team. So there's the POs who work together with the business guys and the engineers in terms of what's our roadmap, what's our agenda, what do we want to do, what's the ideas that we come up with, how do we create value for our customer, what's the stuff that we want to implement. And they come up with what we call a roadmap meanwhile. So with a list of features and an initial prioritization, and then we have ultimately one meeting where we all sit together. The POs basically pitch us, this is what we would do in our domain. So this is how we develop the backend further. And then we would have a discussion around, first of all, do we understand what you guys are doing? How can we help you along the way? And what do we feel has the biggest priority in terms of creating impact for our business? And then we take a decision which is typically very close to what the team is suggesting. So there's typically very limited changes in terms of us making different prioritization. And then the team goes back, has that detailed planning. We work in sprints, so it's typically 2-week sprints that the team uses to ultimately deliver the different features. And then comes back every 3 months to really make sure that we're working in a very agile way. And to maybe sort of sum this up as what have we learned about organization building? As I said, we were a little too late in terms of thinking about how do we organize stuff, how do we structure things. So my big recommendation would be start very early to think about this. Like, how would you want to organize your team, your startup, your company? That's something that we've typically been too late. Continuously care means whatever you decide today will be old tomorrow. And you want to make sure that also your team has an understanding that change is something that's happening continuously. So if you have people on your team that hate change, they're probably going to be wrong in your team. And we've seen this along the way that there's many people who like working in 10, 20, 30 team companies. And they wouldn't work so well if your team grows over 100, 200 people. So there's typically, then it doesn't work. And then you would also have to split up over time. So that's something that's very natural. At the same time, you still need to, as I said, continuously care about your organization, your team, make sure that everybody sort of understands their role, has a perspective, has a job that they love and would want to work for. And one thing that we figured, and where we've been very careful with this, that titles matter. And it sounds pretty simple, but we felt when we get applications from other teams, especially from the startup environment, giving out titles has been very inflationary. So it's kind of like a currency, like you get salary. Titles have been very inflationary. But this is something where we felt this can harm your organization if you're too generous giving out titles, because ultimately you might end up needing to hire someone who's a chief of something already. You need to hire a boss for him if your company grows faster than this specific colleague has been growing. So we've always been very careful giving out strong and high titles to people. And over time with that, I think this has helped us a lot to have a rather organic and smooth approach towards growing the organization. Because, as I said, we've grown from 3 people 6 years ago to over 1,000 people. Typically, the speed of a company development in that phase, if you grow so fast, many people just don't develop that fast. It's just a matter of fact that it needs more time for you to grow in your career than typically the company is growing. If the company is doubling or tripling in a year, you typically don't take that same personal development along the way. So there's always a very high likelihood of situations where you need to hire someone from external to now run a team that's not 5 people any longer, but has 50 people. So that's why we feel you should rather be very careful with the titles that you give out. I talked about processes already a little, and as I said, mentioned the go live process. So we felt you typically start with having a pretty manual process, and I'll give you another example. When we started, we figured how many people would have questions or email us or call us. We're selling bus tickets, it's pretty easy. People know buses, there's bus stops, you can just go there, enter the bus, take your trip. So we started off hiring one service guy. Ultimately, we figured he only works 40 hours a week, and he has weekends and holidays. So we ended up having emergency calls on our weekends ourselves. So there was a answering machine that basically gave us a cell phone number, so people would call us on Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, like, where's my bus, where do I need to go? So we figured we need to hire more people to manage that. When we ended up having millions of passengers, we figured, okay, you can't scale this through people. Like, you can't hire all of these guys, you can't have office space for all of them, and you can't have all of this done manually. Initially, we had, I think it was Outlook to answer customer emails. Then we went to another open source tool to manage our email inbox from customer mails. And then we went to, I think the latest solution is Salesforce that we use, that is linked also to our CRM tool, and then has another layer on top that helps us manage also the interlink to our booking system. So in a perfect world, and this happens in more and more cases, our service colleagues already know the booking history of a specific customer that writes us an email, so all of this is connected. So we really made sure we optimized this process along the way, started off very manually, and now have a pretty high level of automation that sort of we developed over time. And our big learning on that was that you typically can't build systems for a very long time horizon, because you're very likely to throw it away once your company changed, matured, has grown pretty fast. So most of the tools that we used, some of the stuff that we bought from outside, CRM tools, HR tools, etc., we've outgrown them within 2 to 3 years. So you want to make sure you create some flexibility, that you're still able to throw tools away, to implement new stuff, and ultimately, in some cases, even build your own stuff. And this is something that we've been taught, as I said, in a very hard way along the way. So we've came to hate a guy called Murphy, because if you have so many cases, and it's, as I said, last year we've had about 40 million passengers. So everything that you can imagine, and many of you will have their own stories, but everything that you can imagine that could go wrong potentially definitely has gone wrong for us at some point. So there's the weirdest stories out there, and some of them have been in press. Maybe many of you have read the stuff where one of our buses has lost the roof. So you can't think of that. It still happens. So you want to make sure you build processes that also think of the unthinkable, because as I said, if something can go wrong and you have a large scale business with many use cases, many customers, it definitely will go wrong. And this is something that we figured along the way. When we started, we thought, well, we're an e-commerce company, we're selling tickets online. It's pretty easy. And we kind of forgot that we're a transportation company as well, and there's real world stuff happening out there, and this creates real world problems and stuff that you need to think of and ultimately solve. And this is, well, maybe the circle of how would we think about trying out new things as well, and also something that we would try to teach our team, that we still want them to do this. We still want them to take smart risk. We wouldn't take €1 million and invest it into stupid stuff, but we would definitely take 10,000 or maybe 100,000 euros to try out new things, try out new ideas. You want to make sure you measure the stuff along the way, and we were always very keen on measuring what we're doing. I have a few vouchers here, so they all have obviously codes on it. So everything that we did, we measured. So we took a small box of codes, sent it to a university, had some promo teams running around, and then benchmarked promotion teams against each other. Like, who was more successful? What did they do? Tried to learn out of it. And this is still the same approach that we use in pretty much everything we do. We do it in network planning, so we would benchmark different lines against each other and then try to triangulate around what's the distance of the cities, the size of the cities, is there large universities in it. So you look into different patterns that you might be able to figure out to make sure that you really have measurable results and learn out of it over time and then optimize along the way. And once you have something that works, that wins, make sure you do more of that. And again, try out new things and take more smart risk. And that's something that's also coming with a larger organization. So we figured you need to make sure that you have the right KPIs in place. So we ourselves, our investors, everybody around us, like the senior advisors that we had along the way, always have been pushing us for get your reporting right. Make sure you have a high quality of data and you understand really what's going on in your business. And that's something that's very true. One of our first investors said, there's two things that are important for me. One is recruiting and the other one is reporting. And there's a lot of truth to that. And also this is something that we've evolved over time, and meanwhile it's pretty thorough, it's pretty deep and pretty complex. But you want to make sure you understand your business early on and you ultimately have a few measures that are critical to you. And for us, one of our key measures is euro per kilometer. So we always look at how much money are we making per kilometer of traveled bus mileage, basically. And this has always been something that's very critical for us, so that we've looked into all level of detail and that we've developed over time to be very granular, and now we're very capable of controlling that parameter for ourselves. And we know in advance, for example, we have a forecasting system, meanwhile, that works pretty precisely and tells us what's the revenue going to be in January, in February, in March, etc. And we're continuously optimizing these forecasting algorithms as well to be sure to be very precise on our predictions. And this is something that we feel has been, you can't overestimate. We feel culture is something, especially for a startup environment, that's so critical to success that you should spend as much time and effort on it as you can. And this guy, maybe some of you know him, has said culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I couldn't agree more. So whenever you think about how important is strategy for startup success, etc., in a situation where you have such a dynamic environment, we've had super high level of competition, continuously changing market conditions, etc., we felt we need to build an environment where we're going to be able to adapt quickly, where we're going to be able to still tolerate risk, tolerate failure, and learn out of that. And we're still trying to cultivate specifically that culture into our even now larger organization. And you can't really, larger corporations always try to build strategies for like 3 or 5 years. I mean, obviously we have a way and a vision and we know where we're going, but we much stronger believe into the value of the culture that we've built along the way to make sure that we're going to be competitive also in 3 or 5 years from now. And that's something, as I said, you can't overestimate, and where we're still putting a lot of effort in ourselves. And we've kind of come up with this thing broken down into 5 values that we believe are critical to us and that we're trying to also make very explicit to the team. Like, this is how we want you to work, and this is what we expect from you. We want you to think about our customers. We want you to put our customers first. Work in a team. We'll still have an entrepreneurial spirit, even if we're a larger organization, but still keep that spirit. Work in that team, and we want that make it happen approach. So people who think in solutions and not so much in problems. And this has so far really served us well. And we're, on the one hand, we're trying to cultivate this internally, but we're also trying to use this when we do interviews and do recruiting, and also use these dimensions to make sure that we get the right people on board. So if someone's coming to us and not bringing the right level of passion, he or she is probably not the right new colleague for us. And one question that that I get quite a lot is like, how have you been successful against all these corporates? And the learning that we took for us in that market that has been full with corporates. So as I said, we've had Deutsche Bahn, we had National Express, Stagecoach, Deutsche Post, and ADAC had that joint adventure together. Really large companies and large organizations that were competing with us. We felt, as a startup, there's a few things that you can do better in pretty much any case, any scenario, any market environment. And for us, it has been the speed of decision making. So we've been always much faster in taking expansion decisions, optimization decisions, how will we react to specific situations. We didn't have like tons of committees where people had to take decisions over weeks. We could decide this in a circle of 2 or 3 people within an hour or less than that. So that's something that's really critical to us. I talked about taking risk and that risk culture, something that, as I said, we're investing into really keeping that. That's super critical for us. We've always been independent in terms of we didn't have any interdependencies to other businesses. So Deutsche Bahn has always been arguing, am I cannibalizing my core business? What does that do to my trains, etc.? So that's been a lot easier for us. And one big thing that many of you will be aware of, we had no technology legacy. So we had no old systems that we needed to adapt to, no old databases. And we meanwhile do have some technology legacy. And our engineering team always comes up with, I need to spend 30 or 40% on solving technical debt. So this happens, but we're trying to make sure that this doesn't get so bad. And ultimately also always stay innovative also on the IT piece and create an architecture that's scalable also going forward. So this has helped us along the way, and we didn't know these advantages were so big that we were able to ultimately win that market against the corporates, but we were sure this is something that would help us along the way. So what's next? And you've asked this question initially. We want to make sure that not only Europe, but the world is becoming green and a greener place. We've only started in what we're doing. So here's Dominate the Bus Market. You talked about trains. So we're involved into all sorts of different ventures. Aside of the line business, we started our charter platform. So this is, 50, 60 people. So it's going to be at least a double-decker, maybe 2 buses. So if you ever want to rent a bus for yourself, for a university trip, look at our website. You can do this online. We're looking into the train market where we feel this is having some strong synergies to our core business. So ultimately, we understand ourselves as a mobility provider. And the cool thing, I believe, is that we're in a market where so much innovation is happening, so much dynamic is happening that we want to make sure we are at the forefront of that development. And we're always sitting on the table when new business models are designed, new markets are made, and new products are developed. And this is what we're trying to do now. And that's why we feel it's so exciting to be in our market and to be able to shape that market. So that's it for the lecture piece. Obviously happy to answer any of your questions that you might have along the way. You have one.
Yeah, especially in the beginning, when we were like 3 to 5 people, how did you acquire new people to work with you? So that, I think, is always a hard part. Was just personal connections or anything else?
Yeah. Initially, it was very much personal connections. So the first people who worked for us was my sister and Andrew's brother. There was a few other people that we knew along the way and that we had through connections. And it took some time until you sort of build that brand in terms of hey, you could actually work for that company. And I can only advise you to really look into your network. Is there people who I trust, who I know, who I have recommendations of someone, of friends or so? That's still until today a very, very important source for us. We have an internal referral program where we want to make sure we get also the connections from our colleagues meanwhile. Still a very strong source for very good people. And this was what we did initially. And then we did a lot of marketing. We talked to a lot of people and tried to excite them for our project. But this was a little later. Initially, it was mostly around personal network. Yeah. Yeah.
Flixbus is one of the best examples to be in the market. And what is the point for you to buy another product?
The best example for being what?
to buy another Poland as well for other companies to make them part of Flixbus?
Yeah. Okay. So why did we sort of acquire other companies, and is that the question? Yeah. I think what we understood very early on, also compared to our corporate competitors, was that scale matters in our business, and there's so much synergy effect from being the largest provider in a country, and you have so much such huge network synergies and scale synergies from being bigger, that we felt. And with the initial deal was that we merged Flixbus and Manfernbus end of 2014, beginning 2015. And what this did was that we created a player that was covering all Germany suddenly, and we were able to harmonize schedules over time. So obviously it doesn't matter to run a 9 o'clock bus with two companies at the same time and compete with each other. So that doesn't make too much sense. So we felt this is the big step for us to consolidate the market in Germany and to be able to create a network that's obviously better for us from a, again, supply and demand perspective, and also to be able to provide a better offer towards your customer. You could distribute the different rides across the day, you could connect smaller cities, again, have more synergies in your network. And if you look at the market that we're in, there's this natural tendency that these synergy effects are very strong. So Deutsche Bahn is like the 99% market leader in long-distance trains. Lufthansa is pretty strong on the airline business here. BlaBlaCar is very much like the dominating player in the carpooling space. So there's natural synergies that help you along the way, and we were probably the most aggressive ones to leverage on these synergies and took that big bet to merge the two companies. And back then it was a pretty big bet, but ultimately for us, it turned out to be very successful, and this turned out to be the sort of starting point of also our European expansion. So if we wouldn't have done this in Germany, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. So this was really the ignition point of making us able to scale this Europe-wide. Yeah.
Speaking of making the world green, what are your thoughts on e-mobility and
interoperability? We run green buses, and this is for a reason. Obviously on the one hand it's pretty visible on the streets, but the more important aspect is that we already have a very efficient carbon footprint. So traveling on a bus with us is better for the environment than traveling on a train. Obviously it's a lot better than traveling with your car or with a plane. So it is already very green. And I personally also believe that the future will be more electric than anything else. So I don't believe too much in the other possible drivetrain technologies. So I strongly believe it's going to be very much electric. There's no electric bus for our use case yet. So we're continuously pushing the OEMs to give us something that we could work with for pilot projects. We're pretty close to that, and we're likely to have something on the street very soon. But again, this is in cooperation with the OEM, so we're not going to go into building buses ourselves, but we're trying to cooperate with these and help them to develop it along the way, to again make sure that our product is even more environmentally friendly than it is today, and also a very economic reason, it's just more efficient to run electric buses from a total cost of ownership perspective. So I'd be happy to do this tomorrow. Same is true for autonomous driving and autonomous buses. Again, here we feel we're very much at the later point in terms of the focus of OEMs. So they would first do cars, then they would do trucks, and buses is pretty much at the end of the chain. We're still trying to push them to make this work as soon as possible, and we already have a very sort of significant amount of safety systems on the buses that help drivers for safer driving, and this will also help us along the way in all sorts of different reasons. But it's going to take some more time. So until someone is feeling comfy in a 50 people or 80 people bus with no driver at all, that's going to take some more education of people who travel. Yeah.
You talked already about the expansion to the US and about trains. What do you think are the biggest challenges in those two areas? And do you believe you can scale this as fast and as big as you did for the German buses?
I mean, looking at the US, we strongly believe there's a huge market opportunity. So everybody will know Greyhound, and they've been there for, I don't know, 100 years. But they haven't been super innovative around their product. The way they run their business is relatively old-fashioned. At the same time, we feel there's a huge opportunity in the US where also mobility is changing. So it's very much a car-driven economy. But also that sentiment is changing, and you can see this just from the success that Uber, Lyft, and the likes have there. So the way Americans experience and use mobility is changing, and we feel this is a strong window of opportunity for us to add our product to the market. Can we scale it as fast as we have done in Germany or Europe? I don't know. We'll find out. We strongly feel there's a huge potential, and our product has been successful here. It's certainly a big step for us because there's no connection to our core network, so there's no synergies in terms of I already have customers that could interchange or that we could add there. So it is different. There's time zones, obviously, so it's more difficult to manage the team and to make sure that it's coordinated with the rest of the team. They will need support from central marketing, central network planning, so everything that needs communication-based where people need to talk to each other is going to be more complex. So it is a big step for us as an organization. But we felt the opportunity is so big that we have to try it and see what happens. And the same is true for trains. I mean, we're experimenting with it, and we still do. We have the partnership with Locomore. We've been doing a few other partnerships in the past already. We felt there's a certain level of synergy between the bus product and the train product, so people interchange between the two wherever that works best in terms of what's your overall travel chain. It's certainly a market that's much slower than, I mean, if you order a bus, you can have it in 2 to 3 months. If you order a train, you can have it in 2 to 3 years. So it's a little slower than our current market, and we'll see how this is going. But we feel, again, here, there might be an opportunity. We're looking at it, so we'll see how this turns out. Yeah.
Was there any point during your time as a startup when you thought you were going to quit, or that there was no hope anymore?
I probably wasn't at the point where I said, "Oh, I'm going to quit." I was probably multiple times at the point where I felt I need to jump in front of a train or bus. But I think that's very normal. So you do have that roller coaster of having the best job of your life to the worst nightmare that you might ever be able to think of. So I think that's something that's very normal, and that I feel when I talk to other founders, everybody's experiencing. So I think my big recommendation would be, don't do this alone. So always try to get a team that's in this with you. And we've figured, for us, the three of us, we've always been working very closely. We've been discussing all the big problems together, and helped ourselves also through the bad times. And it's in many cases it's like one of us was like having a success and something worked, and the other one had a hard time, and then you sort of help each other along the way. So my big recommendation would really be, don't do this as a single founder. This can be very lonely and very tough. And I wouldn't and couldn't have done it alone. So I'd always go for a founding team. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find 3 to be a good number? Except 4, or would it be less?
Yeah. I mean, for us, 3 was a pretty good number. So I'm not sure if I have a real recommendation for you. I always, if I look at sort of young teams and young founders, if there's more than 5, I always get a little nervous in terms of who's ultimately how do you take decisions? How long does it take until you take decisions? Who's responsible for what? So it gets complex, but 2 to 4 is probably good. Maybe 5 works. It really depends on what you do and what's the background of the team. I think I'd always look at how complementary are you as a team? Do you all have the same skills and same way of thinking about a problem, or do you have different backgrounds? And maybe that's one other recommendation, but that's easy in that room. Always get a tech guy on board. You need someone who really understands this. If it's only people with like a business background and you don't really have that tech knowledge in your team, this is really going to be difficult. And if I'd be an investor, I probably wouldn't do investments in teams that don't have techie on board on the founding or core team. That's really difficult. Well, me as a business guy, I need to advise you need to have someone. Now, I'm not sure if it's probably not necessary in all cases. I mean, at some point, if you want to make money with it, you need, I mean, at least to have some business sense yourself, or get someone on board who helps you with that. So maybe this is a little, like the value of business people might be a little underestimated in that room. But it depends on your business, on your product, whatever you do. Like there's very technical products that sell themselves because they're so great and like technology is brilliant. But that's very few. So in many cases, you need someone who sells this. And if you don't want to do this yourself, or you don't have that sort of business sense, get someone on board. They're cheaper than techies. Yeah.
You mentioned advantages in terms of your business to the corporates in terms of faster decision making and all this, so like a meta stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, can you make one or two examples where you were better in your operations compared to the big fish? So was it a better ticketing system? Was it that you started only with routes which were profitable in the first step? Because it's kind of hard for me to believe that you know outcompete them in the end of the day.
Yes. So if you, I mean, the ticketing system that we use right now is really custom made for our use case. So it had all the complexity of A to D to F to I don't know how many multi-stop problems. We've been always very much data driven. Like the schedules that we come up with had tons of analysis before we actually did the schedules and started that line, and then we were like super fast at, for example, changing lines if they didn't work. Like we would, if we see like 4 or 6 weeks and the line doesn't work, we start the discussion, do we need to change it? What is wrong? Can we push marketing? Is pricing right? So this is very fast, and we're being very critical and data driven here. And if you look at the corporates, they've been, and I'll give you an example because we've acquired some of these guys, but what they did is they basically delivered flat capacity. So they said we're going to optimize on production costs. So we run as much mileage on the vehicles as we can, no matter what actual demand is. And our belief is like fundamentally different. So for example, on a Friday and Sunday, we might run 2 or 3 times the capacity that we do on a Tuesday and Wednesday. And they just didn't do it. They were like flat, like Monday to Sunday, same capacity, same schedule, and they just didn't look at it. And when we talked to them, also during a deal and discussion that we had, the reporting, they looked at it on a 4-week average. So what is my utilization, my prices, my revenues on a 4-week average? And we're like, you kidding me? Like we're looking at it on a trip by trip level. Like what is a Tuesday morning trip versus a Friday afternoon trip? What is this city connection versus that city? And we break it down into all the different like legs that we have along the way. So it's much more granular, it's much more data driven. And then wherever we felt we don't have enough insight, we try to create more data and then develop tools to automate it and to learn out of it and then optimize it along the way. And nobody else has done this. And we couldn't believe it when we looked at it, but it's just true. Like these guys have been building businesses with like multiple 100 millions of revenues based on that management logic and style. And we couldn't believe it, but they still do. Yeah.
Have you taken any consequences from the diesel affair? Because diesel has lower carbon footprint than seen, and you want to optimize for low carbon footprint, but it's still not good for the environment. So how have you dealt with that?
I mean, first of all, it's pretty difficult to take a direct measure on a like 1,500 plus buses diesel fleet if you have such a scandal. I mean, talking about our fleet, like all the vehicles that we use have pretty much the latest technology in terms of filtering and like drivetrain technology. So it's all based on the latest standards. So the stuff that has been in discussion, that is like pretty bad is, well, generations before the buses that we're using now. Most of our partners really buy brand new buses when they start business with us. So the average age of our fleet will be somewhere between 1.5 to 2 years. So it's really very modern vehicles. Do we think about how can we sort of optimize our not only carbon but environmental footprint? Yes, of course we do. So we talked about electric drivetrains. So that's something that we try to push the OEMs to. That we really want to be the first ones to use. Today the use case is pretty obvious in a public transit environment where vehicles run like 100 kilometers a day. For us, they typically do 600, 700, 800 kilometers per day. So battery powered drivetrains don't deliver that as of now. So we're trying to build use cases, specific routes where we could use also electric vehicles, and we're continuously trying to improve there. And I mean, foreseeable future, I still don't, I think the diesel isn't as bad as the current image is. So if you would ask me, probably the most efficient and technically viable solution today would be a hybrid version with like a diesel hybrid. That's something that we would love to use tomorrow. Even cities are now moving towards, and you probably read about this, they try to prohibit diesel cars and vehicles to go into specific cities. So we're going to face that problem as well. So there will be, there's a likely scenario that in the future we'll have vehicles that work electrically in the cities and on a diesel engine outside of the cities. So also to sort of add that to the picture. And there's going to be a lot of innovation on drivetrain technology in the years to come. And you're going to be sure we're the first to use them. Because we're always trying to hunt the OEMs and try to sort of make them compete with each other and show them like, look, they made that progress, where are you standing? Interestingly, on the electric piece, and unfortunately it's not the European manufacturers, so it's not the Daimlers and MANs, it's the Americans and the Chinese that have made the biggest progress and that are likely to be the ones that deliver that first pilot vehicle that we're going to use. And obviously we're trying to use this to go to our German colleagues and say, look, this is where your competition stands. When can you deliver something? But yeah, it's still a long way to go and a few steps to make. Yeah.
How did you manage to find solutions for like exceptional cases in the beginning, like there's an accident or insurance policies, whatever?
We learned along the way. No, I mean, for the sort of big stuff, you typically have analogies from other use cases. So if you talked about insurance, all of our partners obviously have very specific insurance for their type of transportation mode. So they would have that from the charter business, they would do otherwise, or from public transit, so that was existing. We basically had to look at it, do we need to adapt it for us or not? For any sort of technical problems, accidents, etc., we developed our own emergency procedures internally. So we hired people who were sort of knowledgeable about how do you run emergency processes. And I mean, look at airlines, there's stuff in place. So we looked at what do they do, how can we adapt this to us? And ultimately figured out our way of doing it. And with that also built certain industry standards. So today, also the equipment that we use, for example, for nightlines, is way beyond anything that's required legally. So we always ask our partners to use 2 drivers, have specific safety equipment on the buses. So there's only a specific type of bus that is allowed to run nightlines with us. So we went beyond that because, I mean, ultimately we're the brand that's visible outside. So anything that's happening is always coming back to us as a brand and not so much to that partner, Maya is an idiot, but it's always us as a brand. So we wanted to make sure we have the highest standards on these areas as well, but looked at other industries and then adapted to what's working for us. Yeah.
How has your pricing strategy changed as the market consolidated over time? Did you try to take losses in the beginning to undercut competitors, and when did you break even?
This is recorded on YouTube, huh? So I need to be careful. No, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. For us, people do travel with us because it's cheap. and they do try it out because it's cheap, but they don't stay because it's cheap. So if you deliver something on a very low price and the service is shit, people just don't come back. So you always want to make sure you have a good value for money proposition, and we're still like, whatever you look, and if you have an objective look on how you can travel, will always be the cheapest option. There's no way around our production cost advantage that we have, so we'll always be very cheap. And we're typically when we start new lines, connect new cities, we're being very aggressive on price to make sure that word of mouth is starting to kick in and that we get initial utilization. So if you start, also if we go to the US, you would rather sacrifice price realization and have lower prices but have higher utilization to have a mass of people on your bus that start talking about it. And this has worked well for us. And obviously over time you sort of manage willingness to pay on the customer side. And if you sort of look into our booking system and you look on a Friday afternoon, for a Friday afternoon trip, it's probably going to be relatively expensive. And relatively meaning it's still going to be much cheaper than any train ticket or your own car, but relatively expensive. Compared to if you book 4 weeks in advance for a Tuesday, it's probably super cheap. So it's very differentiated. It fluctuates around, is there specific demand peaks, Oktoberfest in Munich, is there Christmas break, is there Easter break, is there specific holidays, is there any event in a specific city, even is there specific football teams playing against each other, and that connection might have a demand peak. So it's really optimized on that. Many of that stuff, of these problems are automated, and some of it is still managed manually. So for example, we try to use a calendar where we have all bank holidays, all events in specific regions, countries, cities, etc., to be sure that we have a precise demand forecast, and on that manage our yield management as well. And again, coming back to the supply and demand match problem, we have an initial hypothesis on how much demand is in the market. That's how we build our schedule. And then you have the fine-tuning based on the pricing that you do. And if you figure, okay, we're making not enough money, then maybe we have too much capacity there, and you will maybe shrink down from 10 rides a day to 8, and then it works, and then you come to a balance where production and revenues work for us, and this is how we automate and optimize over time. So it's pretty differentiated and not that easy answer. Yeah.
How much are your partners involved in the decision making? So you said it's quite data driven, so I assume they have no say at all when they have to drive, how often?
Yeah. It is very data driven, and we come up with, this is the schedule that we would want to run, and this is the service that we're asking you to provide. We'll always have a discussion with them what works operationally. And it goes down to, yeah, my driver doesn't like to stay overnight, can we change the schedule? Like stuff like that. But meanwhile, we've come to a position where they sort of trust in us, knowing, again, demand better than they would, and having a pretty good understanding on what works operationally. And also along the way, we've come to procedures with them where we help them to also optimize their production and their operational piece. So, for example, when they change drivers, on how do you manage that? Would you bring a driver to a specific changing point? How can you do that? How do you manage a driver pool? Where can they stay overnight? Help them with hotel bookings and stuff like that. So we're really getting involved pretty deeply also in the operational piece. And with that built a level of trust at our partners that they would typically say, okay, if you've planned this and you feel this is going to work, then let's try it. And then we'll have operational stuff that we fix along the way. But I would say 90-95% is coming from us, and then we optimize it together with our partners along the way to make sure it works for all parties. Yeah. There was another question somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. At what scale did you launch initially in Germany? Because comparing it to the US, I guess there's a big problem of if you can't offer your service to a big enough population, there's always going to be frustration reading like the Google Fiber problem. There's Google Fiber, but I can't get it.
Yeah.
So did you figure out you have to connect at least this group of cities to be able to launch properly?
When we started, we said, oh, super, the market's going to be deregulated. We're going to have access to any line that we would want to do, and we need to do a nationwide network. And we want to start it all at once. well, and then you face reality, and it just doesn't work like that. So there was, even with the deregulation, there was processes at authorities, and some were faster, others were slower. So it didn't work that you had all at the same time. And then we started with what we could get. And it wasn't like the perfect network, and it wasn't like optimized at all, and it wasn't covering all Germany, and it didn't make sense, but it was the stuff that we could get. So we've been pretty pragmatic. For like a new country, we typically, meanwhile, we're more structured. And back then we couldn't take also that big investment in terms of, hey, let's do the 50 biggest cities all at once and all connect them at the same time and do 200 buses right now. So we've been very pragmatic. Today, our approach is more structured, and we have a target network in mind typically. Like, this is where we want to be in, let's say, 2 years' time. And then we have a starting network, which is kind of like typically taking the major routes where we feel this is where the big demand pools are. And then we're trying to get the relevant and right partners for that. So it's more structured, but still along, even, I mean, if you launch a new country like the US, you still need to be pragmatic. Like, there's always stuff that doesn't work along the way. So you rather go and have an imperfect product than not go. And our prime example, the first app that we had, in terms of being pragmatic, it didn't even have a booking functionality. Like, you couldn't book a ticket. And people were asking us, like, why did you launch it? But we've had like a few 100,000 downloads before we even had a booking functionality on the tickets. So still had tracking on the App Store and on Google, and had visibility, and it helped us from a brand and marketing perspective. And so we built the booking functionality later on. So you rather have that imperfect product and launch it and learn along the way than wait until you have that perfect setting. It's just not happening. More questions? Oh, yeah.
Did you receive some initial guidance or mentorship when you started off with your company?
Yes, and I probably should have asked for more. We initially, we've had some early angels that were trusting us, and like the first guy who invested into us was even taking that risk before the market was deregulated. So it was like totally unclear if it was ever going to happen. And he said, well, that kind of sounds, he was founding a hotel platform before. And he said, that sounds familiar to me. Like, hotels are like bus companies. They have no clue about online and marketing and tech, and you can do this and they can't. And if you do this together, it's going to be great. And he trusted us. And we've used our early angels as sounding boards, as strategic advisors, also like people from our network to talk to, try to discuss the business idea, like what we wanted to do. And there's probably also some advice that I would or could give you. Typically, many startup teams are very sort of secret about, like, this is what we do, and I don't want to talk about it, because I believe I need to be perfect and the product needs to be ready before I talk about it. Like, the more you talk about it, the easier it is to get good feedback and get also outside ideas, critical voices, and it's always helpful. I mean, we started taking part in business plan competitions because we said, look, we write this deck anyways, we can just send it somewhere and get feedback. Like, most of the feedback was rubbish, but some points were quite helpful, and ultimately we ended up meeting that business angel out of one of these competitions. So we looked for that. And I'm saying that we probably should have asked for more. You still do some of the stuff, especially at the beginning, yourself without asking, where you feel, well, I could ask, but I'm sure I know better. And we felt we're being smart. And at some point, like, some guy said, look, it's going to be that way, and this is going to happen. And we said, yeah, we know better. And they were like totally right, because ultimately, when you start a new business and you're like a young and small team, through the different maturity stages, you all have the same problems. Like, how do you hire? How do you get people on board? How do you organize yourself? What do you build inside? What do you do outside? How do you do marketing? What works on Google? What doesn't? Like, there's, I mean, from like the 1,000 questions that you might have in the first year, I don't know, first 6 months, whatever the time frame is, probably 900 are going to be the same for any startup team. So you better talk to people and get senior advice. That's always going to be helpful. Yeah.
What do you think about Autobahnmaut or
I hate it.
something like the Fahrgastrechte from the German train companies?
So what do I think about toll? Ultimately, I like from a general point of view, I kind of do like tax systems that are based on usage of something. So it kind of makes sense to me. Do I like it for us in that specific case? I don't think it's fair because, I mean, Deutsche Bahn is always claiming, yeah, we have to pay for our tracks. Yeah, but I mean, if I could use the Autobahn exclusively, I'm happy to pay for it. So I don't think it's really a comparable case. And I don't think from a political standpoint, it does make sense. Like we're a very social mean of transportation because also people who don't have that much money can afford it and can travel. So why would you put more cost on that system? And it's environmentally friendly. So again, doesn't really make sense. We have weird discussions in politics. For example, we have a bus stop at Alexanderplatz, and people were complaining about we need to get rid of the buses. It's about 70 buses per day that we run there. And they felt, yeah, the diesel engines, and it's also dirty and stuff, and there's a lot of pollution. There's 7,000 trucks every day on Alexanderplatz, and nobody talks about it. So that's why we feel politics sometimes have a little weird impression of what we do and how much impact we have on traffic and pollution. So yeah, I don't think highway toll is going to help in any direction, and even the money that would come with it doesn't solve a single problem that traffic politicians have. So what was the other point?
The
Fahrgastrechte. Yeah, I mean, yeah, passenger rights. So there is existing regulation on passenger rights for our market and for our products. Why is it not the same for planes, trains, buses? I mean, pretty simple. Like, for example, we can't control traffic on streets, so there must be a different regulations on delay rights if something happens out there. So there's something that's just not in our control. So we feel the current situation is fair and is just there, and we live with it and we work with it. We would typically, again here, go beyond whatever is required by law and try to find a solution that works from a customer perspective and try to be very customer-centric here as well. So I think it's regulated, there's laws for that, and we're fine with it. Yeah.
Did you have a secondary job when you were starting, and when did you get rid of it?
Yeah, I was, after university I first went to consulting because I didn't really know what to do and didn't want to commit to a specific industry, so I thought I'd look at a few different ones. And I basically took a sabbatical from consulting to do the PhD. But out of that PhD phase, we founded the company, and it was kind of like back then. It was a process of, 100% PhD went to 80%, and then gradually moved to 150% Flixbus. So this is what happened to us. But Daniel, for example, he was with Microsoft before, so. He was doing Flixbus on the weekends and night shifts, and then over time went to, I think, 60% there, and the rest of the week with us. And so it was also a little gradual. For us, it was mostly because deregulation wasn't clear. So we had a phase for about 1.5 years where politicians were talking about it, but nothing happened, and we didn't know if it was ever going to happen. So we kind of had these two things in parallel. But in most cases, you don't have that, so you can just start. And again here, if you don't commit 100% to that project, just leave it. Just don't do it. And if you don't commit, you don't believe, and then it's not going to work. So ultimately you need to commit. And that was for us, there's this point of no return where we needed to decide, are we going to go back to our jobs or are we going to found a company? And this point is going to come if you want to found a company. And typically it comes pretty soon. And you'd rather commit full-time and 120% or not do it. Yeah?
You just said you were like 150%, and as a young company always works hard, but did you experience that you came to a point where you could go a little slower and
Yeah, I'm doing 9 to 5 now. No, I mean, I must say, it is different in the very early days. Like you live and breathe your startup and the stuff you do, and you do this on the weekends and like in nights and like all the time. I still sort of live what I do, and like, I mean, is it work when I check my emails on the weekend, and is it work when I think about what could we do better and like write down ideas? Like, is that, I don't know if that is work. If you say this is work, then I probably still work a lot on the weekends. But it has, I mean, it's different when you have a larger organization around you, and like the operational business is running without me doing anything. So that's pretty good and pretty comfortable. That wasn't always the case. As I said, we've answered customer calls, and like everything that our team is doing, we've done at some point. Like we've been pretty shit at most of what the team is doing now, but we've done it at some point. And this is different. So you have more room for like the strategic piece of it in terms of like, what is the direction that we're going? What is the big decisions that we need to take? What is the stuff that we need to understand to move the business forward? So it's more conceptual than it has been. It's a lot of operational work and fighting at the beginning. And so this has changed. Did workload go down? Yeah, probably. It got better, but it's still a lot of work.
What is your own personal preferred way to travel?
On a Flixbus. No, I mean, I do like to travel on our buses a lot, but typically I'm not different to our typical customer. So you would decide for whatever your use case is, you choose the best option. And this can be a bus, this could in some cases even be a train, can be a plane. Like I took a flight to come here today because I just didn't have the time. Like bus trip is 650, I think the fastest connection. So I just didn't have the time, took a plane. I do travel on our buses as often as I can because obviously I strongly believe in the product, I like it, and I want to experience it myself. And I always learn something. Like whenever I travel, I learn something, and I always, like the team gets feedback on, hey, can we change this, and why is that? And this was not so good, and please talk to our partners, or talk to our colleagues, or talk to someone. So I think it's super helpful, but as I said, you would decide for every use case. I have a small daughter, and this starts making your life a little more complicated in terms of the stuff that you need to carry with you. So there's also a car involved in some cases, but it really depends on the use case. As I said, I do like to travel on our buses quite a lot. Last time was just a few weeks ago for a trip to Stuttgart. It's the best connection in that case even. Like there's no better way to get to the, especially if you want to go somewhere close to the airport, is perfect. So, yeah. No more questions? Cool. I think we're right on time. Anyways. Very good. If you have any more questions, you have my email here. Feel free to approach me, approach us. And obviously this wasn't, I didn't talk about technology just for talking about technology. If you ever want to look into what we do in detail, I'd be more than happy to get an email from you saying, hey, I'd like to understand what you're doing on the data piece, on the engineering piece. I'm happy to show you, and I'd probably get my co-founder to explain you in more detail. But still, if you ever feel you want to also move something in mobility, feel free to reach out to me, to reach out to us. We'd certainly be happy to get some of you guys on board for whatever format, internship, job, freelance, I don't know. Whatever you like, just let me know. Cool. Thanks for having me.